just the overall story of, wanting to take control of your life and, in a transitional period in your life where you don't know where you're headed, but it's going to be great when you get there.
So how would you define this next era of your life?
I don't really know where it's going to be, but I know wherever it's going to be, it's going to be amazing. I'm doing good. Honestly, this show is really helping me, seriously, it is. Because it's making me refocus on me, you know what I mean? It's making me get back into working out and, doing my vocal training, and it's giving me something to do, more importantly. Sometimes when you're going through stuff, you have to you put yourself into your work. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I put myself in a headspace to where I have to show up and be my best self, and then of course, like the other day I posted, the other day, I guess I was having a moment, but I'm thankful to you guys. I'm back to being my normal tourist self. I have my moments like everybody else where I get emotional, but then you snap out of it and okay, I got to be my best self. That's what it's about.
This was the moment everything shifted. Not because divorce papers were signed, but because the weight finally lifted. For the first time after the split, Kandi Burruss didn't sound exhausted. She didn't sound defensive. She didn't sound broken. She sounded clear. In a quiet but powerful moment, Kandi admitted that she didn't even know where life was taking her next, only that wherever she was headed, it was going to be amazing. And she was determined to make sure of it. Those words landed hard. Because while Kandi was speaking about refocusing on herself, rebuilding her strength, and finding healing through her Broadway comeback, a very different narrative was unfolding on the other side. According to reports, Todd Tucker has allegedly described the aftermath of the divorce as something he wasn't prepared for. A loss he didn't fully understand until it was already permanent. And that contrast is what stopped people cold. On one side, a woman stepping into a new era, saying she's finally doing good, finally choosing herself. On the other, a man now forced to sit with what he may have lost. Kandi made one thing clear. This isn't a storyline. This isn't reality TV. This is real life, real healing, real work. And as she prepares to take the stage 8 times a week, one question lingers. Did happiness come too late for one and right on time for the other?
Juliet has life after Romeo. That's what this whole show is about. When I first started going through what I'm going through right now, this opportunity came. And I thought about it and I was like, I'm going to do it.
So this is, wow, like life imitating art imitating life, full circle. But that's so beautiful, actually, pulling on your real life experiences for this and channeling it through Angelique. How healing is that, and how challenging is that?
It's reality TV right now. Right now, I'm really in the thick of this, and I'm really, trying to go after a dream of really taking this to the next level, being on stage, on Broadway, doing Anne Juliet. That's what I'm doing.
The moment didn't feel loud. There were no raised voices, no dramatic music swelling in the background. But something had clearly shifted. For years, Kandi Burruss had spoken carefully, strategically, as if every word had weight attached to it. As if anything she said could collapse the balance she was trying so hard to maintain. This time was different. After the divorce, for the first time, her voice didn't carry that familiar heaviness. There was no defensive tone, no guarded smile, no attempt to soften the truth for public consumption. Instead, there was clarity. And that clarity unsettled people. Because when Kandi spoke about where she was in life, she didn't frame it as survival. She didn't describe herself as rebuilding from ruins. She described herself as moving forward, even without fully knowing where she was going yet. And that distinction mattered. Social media picked up on it immediately. Clips circulated. Quotes were pulled. Fans noticed what felt absent more than what was said. There was no bitterness, no blame, no visible attachment to the past, just distance. And in the background of that distance, another narrative began to surface. According to multiple reports, Todd Tucker has allegedly described the post-divorce period as far more destabilizing than he expected. Words like difficult, loss, and regret began appearing in conversations surrounding him. Not accusations, not confessions, but something quieter, something closer to realization. The contrast was striking. On one side, Kandi appeared to be stepping into a new phase, unsure, yes, but steady. On the other, Todd was reportedly grappling with what happens when certainty arrives too late. And that contrast became the emotional fault line of the story. Because divorce doesn't always end when the paperwork is signed. Sometimes it ends when one person moves on and the other finally understands what that means. For Kandi, that movement wasn't abstract. It was physical, demanding, relentless. Broadway. For years, she had spoken about it as a dream placed on pause. Something she wanted, but couldn't quite reach, timing, responsibility, and life pulling her in different directions. Now, suddenly, the opportunity had arrived. And instead of hesitating, she took it. What made people pause wasn't just the career decision. It was the symbolism. A woman leaving behind a long, complicated chapter and stepping onto a stage where nothing is edited, nothing is scripted, and nothing can be hidden. 8 shows a week. Live vocals. No retakes. This wasn't comfort. This was exposure. Fans began connecting dots almost immediately. The show she chose and Juliet wasn't lost on anyone. A story about life after Romeo. A narrative centered on reclaiming agency, voice, and direction after a defining relationship ends. Coincidence? Or something more intentional? As the discussion intensified, Kandi addressed the parallels, not dramatically, not defensively, but with an honesty that felt disarming. That statement landed harder than expected, because it stripped away the usual assumptions. There was no storyline to protect, no narrative to build for cameras, no season arc waiting to be edited together. This was real, and real things come with fear. Kandi admitted she was nervous, deeply nervous, particularly about live vocals. She spoke about working closely with a vocal coach, pushing her range, retraining her body to respond under pressure. At one point, she even described her hands shaking before a performance. That detail mattered. It wasn't weakness. It was exposure. The kind of exposure that doesn't fit neatly into empowerment slogans. And yet, she showed up anyway. Not because she felt ready, but because she refused to let fear decide for her. She framed it as something larger than herself. Her children. Kandi spoke about wanting them to see her choose challenge over comfort. To understand that fear isn't a warning sign, it's a test. Fear equals failure, she explained. You have to beat fear. You cannot let fear stop you. Those words resonated far beyond the interview. Parents shared them. Clips were reposted. Comment sections filled with interpretations. Some called it strength. Others called it survival. But most agreed on one thing: this wasn't a performance. This was a woman rebuilding herself in public without asking for sympathy. Meanwhile, the contrast with Todd's reported reflections grew sharper. While Kandi spoke about momentum, Todd was allegedly coming to terms with absence. Not anger. Not blame. Absence. And that's often where regret lives. The internet, predictably, split into camps. Some questioned whether Todd truly understood what he had lost only after Kandi stepped into her independence. Others cautioned against turning private emotional reckoning into public judgment. But even those urging restraint couldn't ignore the symbolism. One person moved forward, visibly, decisively. The other appeared to be standing still. And then came the line that quieted everything. I just do it, Kandi said, referring to balancing 8 shows a week with her personal life. I just do it. Because I want to do it well. There was no grand speech attached to it. No dramatic pause. Just resolve. That line wasn't motivational. It was final. It suggested something deeper than ambition. Acceptance. Not of the past, but of the present. And that's where this story stops being about divorce. It becomes a story about timing. About recognition. About what happens when one person outgrows the version of life they once shared and the other realizes it too late. Kandi didn't declare victory. She didn't frame herself as healed. She simply moved forward. And sometimes, that's the most unsettling ending of all. Because while one chapter closed quietly, the echo of what was lost grew louder. And the question still hangs in the air unanswered. Do some realizations only arrive after the door has already closed? And that's where the silence became louder than anything said before. Because when one person moves forward without looking back, the absence they leave behind doesn't disappear. It settles. It waits. It asks questions no one wants to answer out loud. For Kandi, forward motion looked deliberate. Calculated. Almost clinical in its precision. There was no performance of heartbreak. No public unraveling. Just work. Discipline. Direction. For Todd, according to those close to the situation, it looked very different. Not explosive. Not dramatic. Just heavy. The kind of heaviness that comes from realizing the ending already happened and you weren't ready for it. What made this moment so uncomfortable wasn't that Kandi appeared happy. It was that she appeared unbothered. Not dismissive. Not cold. Simply detached from the gravity that once defined her life. That detachment became the real headline. Because detachment doesn't come from anger. It comes from acceptance. And acceptance is usually the last stage. Reports suggest Todd has spoken privately about how quickly everything changed once the divorce was finalized. How the routines disappeared. How the constant presence, someone who had anchored years of life, was suddenly gone. Not replaced. Not replicated. gone. That's when language shifts. People stop saying we. They start saying I. And I can be a lonely word. Meanwhile, Kandi's days were filling up. Rehearsals, vocal training, physical conditioning, mental focus. 8 shows a week doesn't allow space for nostalgia. There's no margin for emotional hesitation when the lights come up and the music starts. This wasn't escape. It was confrontation, just with a different opponent. Some fans misread it as distraction. Others called it ambition. But those watching closely noticed something else: structure. When life feels unstable, structure becomes survival. And Broadway is nothing if not structured. Every note measured, every step rehearsed, every cue unforgiving. In that environment, there's no room to carry someone else's emotional weight. And that's where the imbalance deepened. Todd, according to sources, began speaking about regret not as a declaration, but as a realization that arrived late. Too late to change decisions. Too late to reframe the narrative. Regret rarely announces itself loudly. It whispers. It shows up in phrases like, "I didn't see it then," or "I didn't know how much it meant until it was gone." And those phrases began to circulate. Quietly at first, then louder. The internet did what it always does: it connected dots. It framed contrasts. It simplified complexity into sides. But beneath the noise, something more human was happening. Two people processing the same ending from opposite directions. One moving outward, one folding inward. And the more Kandi leaned into her future, the more final the past began to feel. There was no attempt to rewrite history. No public blame. No dramatic retelling of what went wrong. Just distance. That restraint unsettled people even more. Because anger can be debated. Silence cannot. Silence implies resolution. And resolution suggests closure. Fans began noticing how Kandi spoke about her life without referencing what she had left behind. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defined her. She spoke about fear as something to be beaten, not avoided. About nervousness as a sign that something mattered, not a reason to stop. Those weren't motivational platitudes. They were coping mechanisms. When asked how she manages everything: career, family, pressure, her response wasn't poetic. "I just do it." That line echoed for a reason. It wasn't inspirational. It was factual. It suggested that waiting for the right emotional moment was no longer an option. That action had replaced reflection. And that's often when people realize something irreversible has occurred. Because reflection is where reconciliation lives. Action is where endings harden. Todd's reported comments, on the other hand, suggested reflection without resolution. Looking backward without a clear path forward. Not bitterness. Not denial. Just acknowledgement. And acknowledgement can be painful when it arrives without agency. Some observers pointed out that regret doesn't always mean wanting someone back. Sometimes it means wishing you had been different when it mattered. And that distinction matters here. Because nothing in Kandi's demeanor suggested she was waiting, or hoping, or leaving space for reconsideration. She had already crossed into something else. Independence doesn't always look triumphant. Sometimes it looks quiet, focused, unsentimental. As weeks passed, the contrast only sharpened. Kandi's schedule intensified. Performances stacked. The physical toll increased. But so did the confidence, the steadiness. Todd's narrative, according to those speaking on his behalf, remained unresolved. And that's where the discomfort settled in. Because society often expects women to grieve publicly, to display the cost of endings, to make pain visible. Kandi didn't. She made progress visible instead. That inversion challenged expectations. And in doing so, it reframed the entire story. This was no longer about who left whom, or who was right. It became about timing, about awareness, about what happens when one person evolves while the other is still processing the last version of reality. The internet, predictably, tried to assign winners and losers. But life rarely operates that cleanly. What's clear is this: Kandi chose momentum. Todd appears to be confronting reflection. And those two paths rarely intersect again. Not because of resentment, but because growth doesn't wait. As Kandi continues stepping onto the stage, night after night, voice steady, presence grounded, the symbolism grows harder to ignore. Life after Romeo. Not rewritten, not revised, just continued. And sometimes, the most painful realization isn't that someone left. It's that they stayed long enough to outgrow you, and you didn't notice until the distance became permanent. That's where this story lingers. Not in accusations, not in dramatic confrontations, but in the quiet space between acceptance and regret. And the question that remains unanswered, unresolved, and deeply uncomfortable: do we recognize the value of what we have only once it no longer belongs to us? Because by the time that realization arrives, the stage lights are already on. And then the reactions began to surface. Not all at once, not loudly, but in fragments. Side comments, subtle shifts in language, carefully worded statements that said just enough to avoid saying too much. Because when a private ending becomes public, the fallout rarely belongs only to the two people who signed the papers. It spreads. Friends notice changes before statements are released. Family members feel tension long before court dates appear on calendars. Business partners start asking questions they never had to ask before. And that's when internal fractures begin to show. Those close to Kandi describe a noticeable recalibration. Not withdrawal, but boundaries. Clearer lines between what belonged to her personal life and what no longer did. She wasn't cutting people off. She was narrowing access. That distinction matters. Because narrowing access isn't about anger. It's about protection. At the same time, reports suggest Todd's circle began shrinking in a different way. Less by choice. More by circumstance. When routines dissolve, so do certain relationships that were built around them. Support doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it just changes shape. And change is destabilizing when it arrives alongside loss. Publicly, both sides remained measured. There were no explosive interviews, no tell-all confessions, no emotional press tours designed to sway opinion. But silence can be strategic. And silence can also be revealing. Observers began noticing that's where the real fracture lies. Because ambiguity allows hope to exist. Finality does not. Behind closed doors, every clause agreed upon likely reinforced a truth neither side could avoid. Whatever they once shared was now being dismantled piece by piece. Not angrily, not dramatically, methodically. That process alone can fracture even the strongest internal resolve. Yet outwardly, Kandi continued to project steadiness. She showed up. She performed. She fulfilled commitments.